All right, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to picture a 16th century fortress completely tucked away deep in the Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan. By day, it's a bustling, beautiful historical ruin. But as the sun sets, the crowds vanish, and this heavy, eerie silence falls over the place. This is Bhangarh Fort, pretty much universally known as India's most haunted location. Today, we're unpacking the chilling mysteries and, more importantly, the hidden truths of a city where literally no one dares to stay after dark.
Right at the main entrance, there's this sign. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't just hung up by some superstitious local. It was actually placed there by the Archaeological Survey of India, an official government agency. The warning is completely unambiguous. Entering after sunset is strictly prohibited. Which immediately begs a massive question, right? Why would a government body put such a hardline restriction on a historical monument? What exactly are they trying to keep us away from? Or what are they trying to keep locked inside?
To really grasp the stakes here, you gotta hear the local folklore. The story goes that three friends decided to ignore the warning and sneaked in at night. They say the darkness inside was so suffocating that their flashlights barely even worked. One friend tumbled into a dry well. The others managed to pull him out and frantically rushed to their car to get to a hospital, but before they could ever get help, they died in a mysterious, fatal crash. Locals will swear up and down this was no accident. It was the fort extracting its ultimate price.
But honestly, that story is just the tip of the iceberg. The claims coming from tourists are relentless. People report hearing the agonizing sounds of women crying in the dead of night. Others talk about hearing breaking bangles or the rhythmic chiming of a dancer's anklets echoing through the ruins. Some get hit by these sudden, unexplainable smells of perfume or get the distinct feeling that a shadow is actively tracking them. And get this, look closely at the architecture. None of the 9,000 houses have roofs. The walls are totally intact, but locals swear that whenever someone tries to build a roof, it instantly collapses. No exceptions.
So how exactly does a thriving, bustling city of 9,000 homes just become a wasteland? Well, locals blame it on the curse of Baba Balu Nath. See, before the fort was built, an ascetic agreed to its construction on one very specific condition. The fort's shadow must never, ever touch his humble home. Decades go by and a royal descendant expands the palace to 7 stories. The shadow fell, the sacred vow was broken, and legend says the entire city was instantly doomed to ruin.
And that brings us to the second, even more dramatic legend, Princess Ratnavati. Renowned for her incredible beauty, she unfortunately caught the obsessive eye of a local master of dark magic named Singya. Knowing she'd never accept him, Singya actually cursed a bottle of perfume she was buying, intending to turn it into this hypnotic love potion. But the princess saw right through the trick. She hurled the cursed bottle onto a massive boulder. The magic triggered, but instead of the princess, the boulder itself fell in love with the tantric. It literally rolled toward him and crushed him to death. Talk about a heavy rejection, right? With his dying breath, Singya cursed the city to eternal ruin, supposedly trapping its souls there forever.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, these are just ancient fairy tales. But wait, terrifying encounters are literally still happening today. One of the most disturbing accounts comes from a journalist named Pallavi. She was leaving the fort right at dusk when her scooter completely died, despite having a full tank of gas. Out of nowhere, a strange man appeared. Without even touching the bike, he started the engine on the very first attempt. He looked right at her and chillingly whispered, "They want you."
All right, here comes the massive twist, and this changes absolutely everything. So prepare to have your perspective shifted. There is zero historical record that Princess Ratnavati ever existed. None. Zip. No contemporary documents, no stone inscriptions, nothing. Historians don't even know whose daughter she supposedly was. And the exact same goes for the dark magician Singya and the ascetic Baba Balu Nath. The entire foundation of India's most haunted fort is built on pure folklore. They're just stories, getting bigger and more exaggerated with every passing generation.
So, if the ghosts aren't real, are all these tourists just lying when they say they feel a dark presence or intense panic in Bhangarh? Well, not necessarily. It's just not ghosts, it's biology. Let's talk about something called infrasound. Back in the 1980s, a British engineer named Vic Tandy was working in his lab when he felt this terrifying chill. He broke into a cold sweat and actually saw a gray shadow in the room. He completely thought he'd seen a ghost. But the very next day, he discovered that a new lab fan was emitting sound waves at exactly 19 hertz. This is infrasound, frequencies right below human hearing. You literally cannot hear it, but your body feels the vibrations, and it triggers intense anxiety and even visual hallucinations. He turned off the fan and, boom, the ghost vanished.
Okay, so how does a random lab fan apply to Bhangarh? Well, the fort is essentially a giant natural infrasound generator. It sits right in a high-risk earthquake zone, nestled tightly into the Aravalli Hills. You've got constant minor earth movements, frequent falling of loose stones, and incredibly heavy winds howling through thousands of completely roofless stone structures. All of this naturally produces infrasound. So when you walk through these ruins, your body is literally vibrating with silent sound waves that trigger an automatic biological fear response.
But sound is really only half the equation here. The other half? It's all in our heads. Back in 2008, researchers at Goldsmiths University ran an amazing experiment. They put subjects in a plain white room and hid devices that pumped in infrasound and electromagnetic fields. Over 20% of the people reported feeling a strange presence, and 8% felt absolute terror. But here is the massive catch. The results were completely identical whether those machines were actually turned on or off. The real driver of the fear wasn't the room itself, it was suggestibility. Because the subjects were told they might feel something spooky, their brains just manufactured the fear. As the old saying goes, fear creates the ghost. And this all comes down to how our evolutionary biology works. When you walk into a place that is famous for being haunted, your brain kicks into overdrive, triggering a phenomenon called pareidolia. It's the exact same reason people saw a human face on the surface of Mars in that famous 1976 photograph. Evolution hardwired us to constantly scan our environment for faces to detect threats. So, when you're wandering through the dark, shadowy ruins of Bhangarh, totally expecting to see a ghost, your hypervigilant brain is inevitably going to turn a weird shadow or a broken pillar into a human figure. You see exactly what you are primed to see.
And look, this scientific reality was actually put to the ultimate test. In 2012, the Indian Paranormal Society spent the entire night inside Bhangarh Fort. They brought thermal cameras, EMF readers, the whole 9 yards, and actively called out into the darkness. The result? Absolute silence. Their lead investigator publicly stated, "You will only find langurs, peacocks, jackals, hyenas, and panthers here. You won't find ghosts." So yeah, the foremost ghost hunters in the country completely debunked the hauntings.
Which brings us to this crazy stark contrast between myth and reality. The perceived threats are all vengeful spirits and ancient curses. But the actual threats? They are intensely physically real. Bhangarh is just 50 kilometers from the Sariska Tiger Reserve, so the fort is frequently visited at night by Bengal tigers, leopards, and wild macaques. Oh, and remember those horrifying sounds of crying women the tourists keep reporting? Yeah, those are actually the distinct, super eerie calls of wild laughing hyenas echoing through the stone corridors.
So, this brings us right back to that super ominous government warning sign at the main gate. The ASI board prohibiting entry after sunset, it is absolutely not an endorsement of some paranormal curse. It's just a strictly administrative, highly pragmatic safety measure. The ruins are completely unlit and structurally unstable, which makes collapsing stone walls a very real nighttime hazard. Plus, wandering around an unlit fort in the pitch black while apex predators are actively hunting, well, that's just a recipe for tragedy. The sign isn't warning you about demons, it's trying to protect you from wildlife and gravity. So, if it wasn't a dark curse, what actually destroyed Bhangarh? Well, history gives us a pretty sobering, decidedly non-magical answer. Founded in 1573, the city actually thrived for centuries. The decline started with politics. In 1720, it was conquered, which reduced it to just a neglected town. But the absolute final nail in the coffin was a brutal natural disaster. In 1783, the devastating Chalisa famine struck North India. In a region that was already struggling with water scarcity, the famine made the city utterly unlivable. The 9,000 families living there didn't die from a magic spell. They simply packed up and fled in a desperate, tragic search for food and water.
So you've got to wonder, despite all this clear history and science, why do the ghost stories still completely dominate the narrative? Well, it comes down to 3 things. First, psychology. Our brains just naturally prefer a compelling villain, like a wicked tantric, over a depressing reality like a massive drought. Second, economics. The India's most haunted tag literally brings millions of dark tourism dollars into the local economy. Honestly, no one there has an incentive to debunk it. And third, algorithms. Social media heavily rewards sensationalized content. If a vlogger visits and finds absolutely nothing, the video flops. But if they claim they felt a ghost, it goes viral.
Ultimately, the whole story of Bhangarh perfectly captures this amazing quote from the legendary scientist Marie Curie. She said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." Bhangarh is an absolute masterpiece of historical architecture. It's a victim of climate and politics, and it's a completely fascinating case study in human biology and psychology. Once you shine the light of understanding into the dark corners of that fort, the fear literally just evaporates.
We've seen how a perfect storm of geographical infrasound, local wildlife, and psychological suggestibility created this massive ecosystem of ghosts out of literally thin air. It really makes you wonder about the limits of our own perception, doesn't it? Knowing exactly how easily the human brain can manufacture terrifying ghosts out of nothing but howling wind, falling stones, and a really compelling story, how might your own mind be playing tricks on you right now? Keep that in mind the next time you feel a random chill in an empty room. Thanks so much for exploring this with me, and stay curious.